Simon Dixon here, and I want to put together a three-part blog series that helps people try and get through the psyop of what has been engineered by what I call the proof of weapons network. And I've been watching more and more people as I spend time on spaces and engage with people in different circumstance. Um, and I really feel for what people are experiencing right now. Across the UK, after rapid inflation, after people being told that there was a promise of owning your own property, real estate, and being priced out of the market, doing everything that they were told they need to do. Go to university, get some college debt, go to subsidize your income on credit card, try and get a mortgage, end up with loads of debt. Everything they do, because the reality is that inflation, which is compounding, people talk about, 2%, 3% per year, but that's 2% on 3% of last year, which was already what many people couldn't afford. And their wages are nowhere near growing at the same rate. So everybody's been losing value. And only those that have been able to play the proof of weapons network, play the game, the debt game, or the hard money game, have been able to outpace inflation. And so we've created this K-shaped economy where more and more of the wealth is consolidating into those that own the assets. And those that don't own the assets are getting deeper and deeper into debt. That's having massive side effects in terms of mental health, in terms of suicide rates, in terms of drug addictions, in terms of homelessness, in terms of wealth inequality, in terms of just general purpose in life. And to couple that with contrived operations, like the global financial crisis was a massive wealth confiscation. COVID was a war on small business and a reaction to COVID. The lockdowns created mental illness, let's quite frankly. Economic dependence. The reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was a clear and obvious deliberate operation to destroy Europe and destroy the manufacturing base of Germany, and therefore remove access to the cheap gas that was needed, to the point where people across Europe and the UK were choosing between eating or heating. And when that inflation went up to 9%, let's not forget what it did in the rest of the world. It went up to 900% in Zimbabwe. And let's also not forget that the proof of weapons network engineers wars in order to reset orders. And why do they do that? Because all of these side effects of the West, like I've been watching video after video of Americans just breaking out on TikTok because they just don't know what else to do. They do not know how to pay their bills. The cost of living and managing their debt, managing their healthcare, managing their auto loans, managing their credit card loans, managing their student loans. They feel like no matter how much they earn, they're not progressing. And some of them are saying the only thing I can do is become a virtual prostitute on OnlyFans. And boys are becoming despondent, getting addicted to pornography. Now, there are all sorts of side effects that are happening across the world as a result of this K-shaped economy and two-tiered economy. And it's becoming increasingly obvious that all the tactics that the proof of weapons network has historically used on the global south, on the Middle East, on Asia, on Africa, are being used on the West today. And so the very same colored revolutions, manufacturing civil unrest, interference in politics, and installing puppet leaders in order to have a central banking debt-based Ponzi scheme that is designed to enslave individuals, allow corporations to pump up the price of their stocks by using corporate debt. And obviously, the government is able to print the money, which means that those that don't have assets end up with all the inflation and paying the bill, and those that do own assets end up with crony capitalism and corporate contracts that the money printer is used to pay because they control the lobby, they control the politicians. And so this is hitting a breaking point. And when you hit that breaking point, you go for mass civil unrest so that you can install an economy that serves such corporate interest. And this is what's happened across the world. This is why countries like Syria are in civil war. This is why Latin American countries have been plagued by gangs, and all of the different things that I've covered on the proof of weapons network historically. And so what I wanted to do is put together something because I know that there is a very clear and deliberate strategy to manufacture civil unrest and manufacture rage right now and have you pointing at the wrong people. And we know that religion is always the opportunity to justify and scapegoat. We know that stirring up racial tensions and religious tensions has always been the divide and conquer strategy. Is why the British and French Empire split up the Middle East. They put imaginary lines all across the Middle East so that they could manufacture sectarian division, religious tensions, racial tensions. They would make sure that the line included different religions, different ideologies, different races, different so that they could, at a stroke of a pen, create civil unrest, manufacture tensions, push a narrative that these are religious wars when they're actually intelligence operations and colored revolutions, and all of the operations that have, quite frankly, been declassified, and I've covered at length on my blog. And so what I wanted to do is try, for those that are in the mental state, to understand what's actually happening. Because I know what's going to happen right now. Everyone's going to blame the symptoms and no one's going to look at the cause, because the cause is too damn complicated, quite frankly. It took me most of my life of obsessing over the topics of investing money, working in the proof of weapons network in the investment banking, leaving, working on monetary reform, going into debt slavery, and then achieving a level of financial independence I never imagined was possible thanks to Bitcoin and investing. Anyway, this proof of weapons network is in the advanced stages of the next operation, which is using the tactics that it used around the world, the colonial divide and conquer strategies, on itself, because it's now become a global stateless empire that has no affiliation with no country. And I've covered this on many different podcasts, that they're sacrificing Europe and the UK. They're vassalizing US into a corporate structure that's got nothing to do with the people. Left and right is irrelevant. Republican and Democrat is a distraction. Conservative and Labour all work for the same lobbies. And there are demographics in the world that are still having children, because this has led to the West having the lowest birth rates, and any country that is affiliated with the West, whether that be Japan, South Korea, obviously even the One China policy, not affiliated with the West, but there's been these demographic collapses. And so how do you solve, when you are a global elite looking over the world, that meets in the World Economic Forum, and is able to set United Nations policy? You look at the world and you say, right, we have a pension crisis and governments are broke. We took all their money through all these wars. How do you fix that? Well, you either wipe out the elderly and take out the liability, or you flood a country with immigrants and turn them into taxpayers, or you flood them with immigrants that are actually going to create civil unrest, and then you use manufactured operations in order to stir up hatred, and then you usher in a surveillance state, and with that you replace humans with universal basic incomes, police states, and complete surveillance state technology. The rich leave for the regions that are peaceful, the ones that are prospering, the ones that aren't in debt-based Ponzi schemes, whether that be Dubai, whether that be Saudi, Qatar, China, Russia, Singapore, the islands, the Channel Islands, Isle of Man, all of these Cayman Islands. And the rich have got their exit strategy while they leave the rest to just deal with the civil unrest and enter into this police state. And it's very dark, but at the same time, I've always pushed solutions. I've been helping people with that. But you can't understand the solution unless you can understand the problem. And so what I wanted to do in this 3-part video series, the part 1, I wanted people to understand the proof of weapons network from the perspective of a presentation that I gave at a conference for Muslim Bitcoiners. And I want people to understand that there is a very clear and deliberate operation that started with 9/11 in order to engineer the emotion that people in the West feel towards Muslims. And I know many people don't want to hear that, but the groups that you call the terrorists have been manufactured, the ISIS's, the Al-Qaeda's. 9/11 was an intelligence operation. It justified war after war after war. And they have been going through the types of wars that the West is now using on itself, now that it's created this advanced, national, geopolitically neutral, profit-driven proof of weapons network. And so part 1, I want you to understand the proof of weapons network and some of the wars that has led to this perfect environment for mass immigration, civil unrest campaigns where you do open borders, and then you can have mass deportations that leads to the types of changes like Patriot Act after 9/11, and the changes like the Genius Act for stable coins and the Big Beautiful Bill, which gave all of the data to Palantir to manage these borders, while for your safety, quote unquote, an element of truth to it, they have these privatized armies and things that look more like martial law. And so I want part 1 is really just understanding the proof of weapons network from the perspective of all of these wars that has led to the ability to manipulate open border policies, and the civil unrest that we're experiencing right now. Part 2 is another operation, is to deliberately allow a narrative. And if you have watched part 1, you'll understand that Wall Street essentially created the Federal Reserve to get all American individuals, businesses, and governments deep in debt. And World War One never ended. There's no coincidence that income tax, the Federal Reserve incurred in 1913, and then immediately after the Proof of Weapons Network transferred all the gold from Europe, from Russia, from Germany, from the British Empire over to Fort Knox. The Federal Reserve built the Proof of Weapons Network, and it needed war in order to get to it. And I would argue, if you listen to the part one, that we never left World War One. America and the Proof of Weapons Network had been in a continual state of war ever since, and it never ended, and it still continues to this day. And so the part two is that during World War Two, and in World War One, the same forces that funded the Federal Reserve were the same that funded the Bolsheviks in order to create the communist Soviet Union and overthrow the Russian Tsar, and also funded the Nazi fascist movement in Germany that led to the rise of Hitler. The Bank for International Settlements was the mechanism for funding. It was the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, and the Bank for International Settlements on Wall Street that funded Nazism. And that was the same creators of the Federal Reserve, which were, modeled upon the Bank of England model and the colonial empire that was built to bankrupt the UK government. Well, that's all in part one. But in part two, through religious scapegoating, many developed a conspiracy theory around the Jewish question. And this was what this is what was used in order to push for the Nazi regime. And there's been a resurgence of that ideology based upon nationalism and a similar, type of narrative around Jews ruling the world. And once you have that Jews rule the world narrative, when you combine that with operations like during World War One, the whole Zionism was awarded by the British Empire Palestine, and we're now in the midst of a genocide where for 2 years we've been watching mass starvation, mass famine, mass crimes against humanity, and video after video after video of absolute atrocity. And I don't want to distract you too much, but I created a blog called Atrocity Inc., which helps you understand how October the 7th was an operation as well, that was used to make you feel and justify what happened. But we've been bombarded with all of this imagery of killings, of civilian casualties, of targeted attacks on women, children, normal family people, just normal civilians. And obviously the whole narrative that was created in part one was used to justify it. So now you end up with a two-tiered, let's call it mindset, or even a three-tiered. You've got those that feel there's been a Muslim invasion and terrorists are taking over the world and want to take away their freedom. You've got those that believe Jews rule the world and they've orchestrated a conspiracy where they rule every aspect of media, of technology, of banking, of all the politicians, blackmail rings like Jeffrey Epstein, and elements of truth, but really scapegoating a whole group of people. And the same people manufactured ISIS, that manufactured all of the Nazi regime, that manufactured, this blackmail rings and pedophilia rings and various other things. And so part two is to get to the truth of, do Jews really rule the world? Once you understand those two concepts of how Muslim hatred was engineered, a Jewish conspiracy was engineered, and some of it has partial truth, but it's mass manipulation, because it doesn't reflect the reality that you're being told. And then couple that with the effect of the Federal Reserve, which is these predominantly Christian population, countries, let's call them, that have had de-religification, mass pornography penetration, neo-prostitution, and declining birth rates, with massive inflation and a cost of living crisis, and those choosing between eating and heating, you get these big pockets of problems around the world. The Christian countries that are mad that their country has been taken over by Jewish rule in a shadowy conspiracy, and a Muslim invasion where you feel like this cultural identity is being targeted, and you end up blaming the immigrants and thinking they're taking the job. And so once you combine these three narratives together, then you really can see above, and you can see the world at a different level. And so with that in mind, I'd like you to watch part 1 and part 2. And then your obvious question will be, well, what's the end game? Well, the end game is manufactured civil unrest. And I wanted to create a blog called Part 3. And in Part 3, it was based upon an expo that I saw and a conversation with ChatGPT about what the end game is of all these institutions. And I think it's gone out of conspiracy theory into a lot of fact that we can see right in front of us right now. And so once you understand the end game, which is part 3, then you can look at what's happening in the world today and see why these countries are being ruined, why the tactics of colonialism that was used on the rest of the world is now being used on the West, and why they are actually using algorithms in order to manufacture hatred, civil unrest, blame shifting, and pointing in the wrong direction, so that you don't point in the right direction and you suddenly find yourself on a universal basic income, with all the technology and social credit scores, on a stable coin and central bank digital currency standard, and you didn't have the time to escape the proof of weapons network with peaceful proof of work in self-custody. And so part 3 is for you to understand the end game. And then once you understand that, I don't want to leave you disempowered. And so the 4th task after that is to understand Bitcoin in self-custody and get yourself set up and set up a plan. Because the only way to beat this is to beat inflation. The only way to beat the Federal Reserve, the proof of weapons network, the central banking cartel, is to boycott it. The only way to beat BlackRock and the asset managers is to boycott it through self-custody. The only way to boycott the banks is to put yourself in a financial position where you're no longer a debt slave, and not have to borrow. And the only way to take down these global empires is to hit their profits and redirect the flow into local and community. And so I'd like everyone to have a plan. I've been trying to push people into this plan ever since I went live on YouTube 14 years ago, wrote the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin when it was just $3, and spoke at the first Bitcoin conference in Prague. And I'd like you to have a plan, because you have to, quite frankly. And so with that in mind, this was a long introduction. I'd like you to commit to watching part 1 right now, which is on, the quote unquote Muslim invasion in the context of how the proof of weapons network had a presentation that I gave in the Muslim Bitcoiner conference. And then you can move to part two when you have time to Jews really rule the world. And then in part three, you can understand what the end game is. And then finally, in part four, you can put together your solution. And so I just wanted that step by step and just kind of put things together. So each one, if you don't have time to watch the whole thing, we create an AI summary. And that AI summary is a TLDR, but then I want you to go back and watch the full content, read the full blog, and commit to getting through all, four parts, so that at least whatever's happening in your life, you've got a plan, you've got something you can commit to. And I'm pretty sure it's going to work because I don't know what else. If I didn't have what I'd be sharing, I don't know. I'd be in the exact same position where I don't have the ability to exit, where I don't have the ability to opt out, where I don't have the ability to boycott. And I'd be a debt slave just like I was. And I'd be on that universal basic income. And I need as many of you to escape that as possible, because at the end of the day, it's going to be us. They're going to be left picking up the pieces, and have the mental capacity and mental strength to win the spiritual mission, whatever that belief may be for you. So let's jump into the AI summary of my presentation at the Muslim Bitcoiner, and then maybe schedule out how you're going to get through the other pieces of content. I know you're bombarded with content; it's happening everywhere. But if you relate to me, I've been deep in debt. I know what it's like to be a debt slave, and I also know how to escape it because I've done it. And I've built a community of people that have also done it. And quite frankly, I don't really have an agenda other than getting more and more people to do this, because I don't need you to buy anything from me. I don't need, my YouTube channel doesn't have any monetization. I don't work for a sponsor. I don't have any sponsors. I don't need any sponsors. And I just want as many people that have been through this process, so that we can fight back against it, and win the spiritual mission when it is needed the most. Over to you.
The world often feels like a puzzle, right? With maybe some
Yeah.
missing pieces, especially when you look at big, really swirling topics like immigration. It's easy to get lost in all the noise, the information overload. So today, we're going to try and cut through that. We're bringing you a perspective that, well, it links some truly unexpected dots. Our deep dive today is into the work of Simon Dixon. He's someone with a pretty distinct way of looking at global economics, geopolitics. We're focusing specifically on his blog post. It's titled, Why Immigration is Rising in the West and What's Behind the Muslim Invasion Narrative. It's quite a title, and our mission really is to give you a TLDR summary, a concise look at the full blog post, his own audio intro to it, and also a glimpse into a presentation he gave. That was at the Bitcoin Muslim Summit in Dallas, Texas, back on April 6th, 2025. He was a featured guest there. So the core question we're tackling, and this comes straight from Dixon's analysis, is why is immigration rising in the West? And what's really behind that Muslim invasion narrative? Prepare yourself, because we might connect some dots you hadn't considered before.
Yeah, what's really illuminating about Dixon's whole approach is that he offers this kind of unified theory. He's inviting us to look beyond just the surface explanations. He wants us to link these events and trends that seem separate, you know, into one cohesive narrative. He really challenges the idea that these things are just coincidences. He presents this framework where, in his view, these events are interconnected, deliberate even.
Okay, so let's unpack where Dixon starts.
Well,
He kicks off by acknowledging this feeling, this widespread feeling of struggle across the West, whether you're in the UK, America, Europe. It's that sense that the average person, well, they're doing everything they're supposed to do, right? University, taking on debt, getting a mortgage, but they're still getting priced out. Their purchasing power just keeps, well, shrinking. It's a feeling a lot of us can probably relate to.
well, absolutely. And Dixon argues this isn't just, bad luck or the normal ups and downs of the economy. He posits it's a deliberate result of something he calls the proof of weapons network. Now, this term is really central to his thinking. For him, it means the global fiat monetary system and all the institutions connected to it. He argues this system fundamentally drives conflict and control. It's like an operating system for the world, designed, he says, to extract wealth and keep power concentrated. We'll get into the history he traces in a bit, but that's his core idea for understanding why these struggles feel so, well, engineered.
Right. That's a pretty powerful claim right off the bat, and kind of disturbing, actually. You mentioned the K-shaped economy that Dixon talks about. For those of us trying to picture that, what does that K really look like in terms of wealth and debt?
Okay, imagine the letter K, but lying on its side. So one arm shoots sharply upwards. That represents the asset owners, right? Their wealth is consolidating, growing fast. These are the people who benefit from inflation because they hold things like real estate, stocks, commodities, stuff that goes up in value as the currency goes down. But the other arm of the K, it just plummets downwards. That's pretty much everyone else. People whose wages aren't keeping up, who are sinking deeper into debt, whose quality of life is declining. Dixon points out that inflation, even if it's quoted at, say, 2–3% a year, it compounds aggressively. It just quietly eats away at the savings of people holding cash or on fixed incomes. He sees this K-shape not as an accident, but as a deliberate outcome, one that fuels things like mental health crises, addiction, homelessness, massive wealth inequality, all things that, in his view, serve the system's goals.
So it's not just some abstract economic chart. It's a real human experience of division, of decline. And Dixon connects this even further, doesn't he, to big global events we've all lived through. How does he see this proof of weapons network playing out there?
Yeah, he draws some very bold connections. For example, he cites the 2008 global financial crisis as a mass wealth confiscation. Essentially, he says, it transferred wealth from the public to the very banks and institutions that caused the mess in the first place. COVID-19, in his analysis, becomes a war on small business, which just sped up the consolidation of wealth into huge corporations, and the reaction to the Russia-Ukraine invasion. He claims that was a deliberate move to, quote, destroy Europe's manufacturing base, leaving people literally choosing between eating or heating their homes. His point is, these aren't isolated incidents. They're orchestrated moves within this bigger network to achieve specific economic and societal goals, often pretty punitive ones.
Wow, that's a huge claim, connecting so many different threads like that. So if this K-shaped economy and these crises are, as Dixon sees it, engineered, then how do social narratives fit in? And specifically, how does immigration become, as he puts it, a weapon within this proof of weapons network? This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Building on that, Dixon's core idea is that these economic pressures create the perfect breeding ground for engineered narratives. Why? To distract us from what's really going on with this network, he asserts the network actively engineers social unrest and division.
And he focuses heavily on the Muslim invasion narrative specifically. What's his argument for how that's actively manufactured?
He really points the finger at media and state actors. He contends that basically since 9/11, there's been this clear, deliberate operation to stir up negative feelings towards Muslims in the West. How? By manufacturing or, amplifying groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. These groups then become the justification for endless wars and a target for public anger. He also brings up a parallel narrative, the Jewish conspiracy narrative. While he acknowledges there might be elements of historical truth tangled up in it, he says it ultimately serves the same purpose, scapegoating an entire group. Just like the Muslim invasion narrative. For Dixon, both are tactics. Divide and conquer tactics to divert blame.
So it's not just about tapping into existing fears, but an active, ongoing process of creating the narrative itself.
Yeah, that's a powerful thought.
Yeah.
How does Dixon then link this historical divide and conquer strategy to what's happening now with immigration?
Right, connecting it to the bigger picture, Dixon calls these classic colonial tactics a divide and conquer strategy. He points back to history, like the British and French empires just drawing lines on maps in the Middle East, creating artificial countries, deliberately fueling sectarian divisions to maintain control. Now, fast forward to today. He argues the combination of mass inflation, the cost of living crisis, falling birth rates in so-called Christian nations, other societal problems, all of this is being weaponized. He claims these narratives, the Muslim invasion, the Jewish conspiracy, they aren't just popping up organically. They're engineered to shift blame away from the underlying financial system, to direct anger towards immigrants or specific religious groups instead.
And that leads him to his pretty stark claim about immigration itself, doesn't it? Precisely. Dixon claims immigration itself is part of the weapons they use. He describes it as, and this is a direct quote, forced immigration through open borders and corresponding deportations engineered operations. The goal, in his view, isn't humanitarian aid. It's to deliberately create civil unrest, which then allows the network to swoop in with its desired solution, usually involving more control, more consolidation of power. So yeah, under this framework, immigration becomes a tool for destabilization.
Yes. Okay, that is a lot to take in. To really grasp how immigration could be seen as a weapon here, we need to dig into this proof of weapons network itself. What is it fundamentally? How did it even come about? You said we're talking centuries of history. Dixon's basic claim is that it is the global fiat monetary system.
Exactly. He traces its roots way, way back, 1694, with the Bank of England. He describes it as creating this debt-based Ponzi scheme with the king, specifically to fund wars like the Napoleonic Wars. The Ponzi mechanism, as he sees it, works like this. Imagine the bank creates £1,000. It charges 10% interest, so £100 is due back. But that extra £100 doesn't actually exist in the money supply they just created. It has to be borrowed into existence. This, he argues, forces more and more borrowing, constantly expanding the debt. He calls it a perfect incentive system for perpetual debt, for individuals, for corporations, for governments, because the system always needs more debt created just to pay off the interest on previous debts.
Right, so it's like a built-in engine for endless expansion and ultimately control through debt. How did this spread globally from England?
Well, this system, he explains, allowed the British Empire to use its currency as a, quote, weapon of mass destruction for colonization. They'd go in, steal hard assets like gold and silver. He gives the example of counterfeiting local currency beads in Ghana to undermine their economy and then impose their own debt-based fiat system. Dixon argues this blueprint, financial control through debt, was then systematically rolled out across the globe. Then he jumps forward to the U.S. He mentions several attempts by the Bank of England to set up a central bank there, which finally succeeded with the Federal Reserve in 1913-1914. He names powerful families like the Rothschilds, Warburgs, Rockefellers, and Morgans as being behind its creation.
That's a huge claim, linking those families directly to the Fed's creation like that. And then he connects these financial interests to, funding both sides of major conflicts. That seems extraordinary. How does he justify that?
It is definitely a staggering claim. Dixon frames it within this context of needing to create strategic tension, basically, needing conflict to generate endless wars and the debt that funds them. He argues World War I was manufactured to break up old empires, which led to things like the Balfour Declaration, the creation of Israel events he sees as deliberately creating long-term geopolitical instability. And yes, he claims these same financial interests funded both the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and the Nazi movement in Germany, not because they believed in either ideology, he says, but purely as a cynical means to sow conflict, generate massive wars, and create colossal amounts of debt, which the proof of weapons network system thrives on. He sees it as this continuous cycle: manufacture conflict, generate debt, profit, repeat.
Wow. Okay, if you accept that premise, it completely reframes how you might look at 20th century history. So after World War II, how did this system kind of lock into the global structure we have today?
Well, after WWII, America had accumulated a massive amount of the world's gold. This allowed it, through the Bretton Woods Agreement, to establish the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. Dixon then argues that institutions created around that time, like the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, became predatory. He claims their role was essentially funding wars globally, deliberately getting countries addicted to dollars and therefore addicted to the whole debt-based fiat system. He lays this whole thing out as a kind of three-tiered structure.
A three-tiered system. Okay, break that down for us.
All right, so layer one, according to Dixon, is the central banks themselves. This is the codified debt-based Ponzi scheme. It's where the riba, the interest in Islamic finance terms, is baked in. The system inherently needs more debt, exponential growth. Layer two, he says, is the intelligence agencies CIA, Mossad, MI6, and others. He claims their real job is creating false flags. Covert operations designed to look like they were carried out by someone else, usually to justify military action or policy changes, all serving corporate and financial interests under the banner of national security.
Okay, central banks, intelligence agencies. What's the third layer in Dixon's model?
Layer three, Dixon states, is governments. In his view, they are essentially installed or manipulated to create the narratives and pass the laws that justify and advance the agenda of the first two layers, the corporate and financial interests. And Dixon takes it even darker. He links this whole network to massive money laundering operations, even pointing to entities like the Vatican Bank. He claims this system funds vast black markets, sex trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking. He argues this makes fiat currency itself inherently unsustainable by its very code, because, in his view, it relies on these illicit flows for part of its circulation. So yeah, it's this meticulously built system of control, from the top banks down to governments, with a really disturbing underbelly, according to him.
Right. So if this incredibly elaborate system is, in Dixon's view, behind the economic struggles, the engineered narratives, even centuries of conflict, what's the ultimate goal? Where is this all heading? And maybe more importantly, what, if anything, can be done? He talks about a totalitarian technocracy. What does that look like?
Yes, his endgame vision is pretty bleak, actually. He describes a new world order driven by AI, artificial intelligence, and specifically AI weaponized warfare. Dixon outlines various mechanisms of social control he believes are being rolled out or are planned. Things like social credit scores tied to everything you do online, maybe on platforms like X, using XAI, auditing governments using big data analysis, and crucially, the widespread implementation of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, possibly alongside universal basic income, UBI. These technologies, he argues, quote, can codify control, forcing people to spend money on controlled activities. Essentially a system where your ability to buy things could depend on whether you're following the rules, whatever those rules might be.
That paints a picture of
Yeah, actually,
unprecedented levels of control. How does he see this playing out in places like the U.S.?
Dixon claims America itself is being asset stripped. The wealth is being siphoned off to build this AI technocracy, which he says is controlled by billionaires who, he alleges, borrowed money at near 0% interest from the Fed, basically using the system against itself to consolidate power. He points to things like the Patriot Act as examples of laws that criminalize dissent, allowing arrests, deportations, just for protesting. And then, in perhaps his most disturbing claim, Dixon asserts that AI warfare and concepts he calls occupation as a service and even genocide as a service are being actively beta tested right now. He specifically mentions places like Gaza and Ukraine. By genocide as a service, he seems to mean using advanced AI, surveillance, and autonomous systems to systematically control, suppress, or eliminate populations, offered almost like a technological package. The data gathered from these horrific beta tests, he claims, is then fed back to refined command and control technology. Technology he believes is intended for implementation in Europe, likely via CBDCs, and in the USA, perhaps through stablecoins initially.
That is incredibly heavy stuff, and frankly, terrifying to even consider. If that's the endgame he sees for the proof of weapons network, does Dixon offer any way out, any alternative?
He does, and it's very clear: Bitcoin. Dixon presents Bitcoin as the peaceful, ethical alternative to this whole proof of weapons network. He sees it as decentralized, transparent, and crucially deflationary. Its supply is strictly limited. This, he argues, aligns with ethical principles, particularly against riba, or usury interest. He explains it simply as digital hard money. There's a fixed, auditable supply. Only 21 million Bitcoin will ever exist. That's a massive contrast to fiat currencies that can be printed endlessly. It can be sent anywhere globally. It's inherently resistant to inflation. And critically, it allows individuals to truly own and spend their money peer-to-peer without needing permission from a bank or a government.
Okay, so the core idea is reclaiming financial power from this network he describes. How does he suggest people actually do that? What's the call to action?
Dixon advocates for what he calls peaceful resistance. And the method is adopting Bitcoin, specifically in self-custody. What that means practically is things like consistently saving a portion of your income in Bitcoin, maybe every month, regardless of the price fluctuations. Avoiding short-term speculation. And really importantly, learning how to hold your own Bitcoin securely self-custody, using maybe a hardware wallet so it's not held by an exchange or a third party. By doing this, he argues, you effectively boycott the central banking system. You defund the proof of weapons network, in his words. You redirect your economic energy, your wealth, towards something he sees as productive, ethical, maybe community-focused. He often shares his own story as an example how he bought Bitcoin very early, used it to eliminate his own debt, achieve financial strength, and now invests in Bitcoin-related companies. For him, it's a proven path to financial independence and living more ethically.
That's a powerful personal angle he brings in. What's his ultimate vision? If enough people do this, what does this bottom-up revolution achieve?
His ultimate vision is quite profound. He believes Bitcoin enables this bottom-up revolution, where individuals can effectively cut out the middlemen, the nation-states, the big corporations, leading to a situation where people are, as he puts it, accountable only to our creator. Now, he's clear, Bitcoin alone won't magically end all wars or fix human nature. That reigns complex, but he believes it provides the tool to remove the rigged game that brings out the worst in human behavior. It offers, in his view, a financial system built on transparency and sound money principles instead of debt, control, and endless expansion.
So let's bring it back. What does all this mean for you listening right now? And for that initial question we started with, why is immigration rising? And what about the Muslim invasion narrative? Simon Dixon's analysis gives a pretty stark answer.
Yeah, for Dixon, the answer is clear. Rising immigration and those associated narratives, they aren't just happening organically. He argues they are engineered by this proof of weapons network, his term for the global fiat monetary system, engineered as a tool to create civil unrest, to distract people from the failures of the system itself, and ultimately to pave the way for what he sees as an emerging totalitarian technocracy. He presents it as a deliberate operation, one that uses existing social tensions, economic hardship, to maintain and actually expand its control.
Okay, so considering Dixon's really extraordinary perspective here, maybe the question for you is, how might recognizing these potential narratives, as he frames them, empower you? How might it help you critically evaluate the information you see every day and maybe make choices that align better with your own values in this increasingly complex world? And what steps, if any, can individuals take to perhaps reclaim some financial sovereignty, to contribute to what they see as a more just system, even when facing these kinds of powerful, intricate forces he describes?
It's definitely, well, it's certainly a lot to think about, and a profound challenge to how many of us might view the world around us.
The audience here, but we've got a full house today and a lot of beautiful souls and faces here that are excited to hear you speak. So inshallah, we're going to get started. This next talk is called Combating the Proof of Weapons Network with Simon Dixon. Simon was very early into Bitcoin. He wrote one of the first, I believe possibly even the first book on Bitcoin back in the day. He started a platform called Bank to the Future and has been an investor in hundreds of Bitcoin startups. I believe he's based out of the UK, and we're really excited to welcome you. Brother Simon, take it away.
Okay, thank you for the welcome. So we're running. Can you see me and hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Simon Dixon, if we haven't met already. I'm a Muslim revert, and I was brought up with a Christian father and a Jewish mother. For the last 25 years, I started my career in the investment banking industry. After several years of working in investment banking on the trading floor, in corporate finance, in stockbroking, I had something in my fitrah that said there was something that was not right about the industry that I was working in. I didn't really fully understand it, but prior to that, I was indoctrinated into different types of economic thoughts. I did a master's in economics at University of Manchester. You're definitely indoctrinated into understanding economics from the perspective of believing that inflation and riba are actually baked into the system and there's nothing you can do about it. So you go down a different ideology like Keynesian economics, and it is actually written to justify how you can get governments, individuals, and corporations deeper into debt in order to stimulate economies. And as you stimulate economies, because there is a riba inherent and programmed into fiat currency, you have to have systemic inflation, and they have targets for it of about 2%. And we're not taught that there is any other way. The entire history of economic trade, Islamic finance, the different types of schools of thoughts that superseded Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, kind of eradicated from history in the university prospectus as you learn economics. And so I was in that ideology, and I had to self-study. And so I left investment banking in 2006 because I joined a community called the Monetary Reform Community. And once I had learned how the entire fiat currency system was in fact a debt-based Ponzi scheme, that was the world's largest debt-based Ponzi scheme that was enforced by regulations, rather than you understand that very quickly the financial system is guaranteed by design to get people deeper into debt, to create wealth inequality by code, and there is no way of avoiding it. So if you use any fiat currency, it actually got codified. So I really spent a long time studying how did that actually happen. And I want to start at a particular point in history where fiat currency, the pound, the euro, the dollar, actually had a Ponzi scheme codified into it, where it would guarantee that the lessons that we learn in the Quran about Islamic finance, sustainable finance, the problems with riba, would actually be codified so that you couldn't avoid them. And it brought us to exactly where we are today. So I started teaching that. And in 2011, after giving lots of talks, working in the banking reform community through not-for-profit areas after a career in investment banking, it wasn't really going anywhere. So I tried to create a non-fractional reserve bank where you could own your own money. It wouldn't leverage up people's deposits. It didn't have riba built into it. People could actually have a say in what was done with their money, because quite often, just by investing in a pension, you were inadvertently contributing to many, what I later found out were haram activities. And so it wasn't possible with fiat currency to do that. And we applied for a license at the Bank of England, and the Bank of England rejected us because they said you need to build it on top of a fractional reserve bank. It was then that I realized that this concept of fractional reserve banking that codifies riba into a debt-based Ponzi scheme that creates wealth inequality and enslaves people through debt, that I realized that there had to be another way, because I couldn't get a bank through the system. And so I wrote a book called Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust, to help people understand what the future of the system was. We had the global financial crisis, and by 2011, I launched the book at the first Bitcoin conference in the world when Bitcoin was $3, and learned that Bitcoin actually was money you could own, money that has a fixed supply, and money that was the antithesis of the riba-based financial system, where nobody could change the rules, and the supply was completely fixed. In fact, it codified better rules than gold. And once I understood that, I came up with a simple rule. I was deep in debt at the time, and I was not able to escape the system. And so I came up with a simple rule, which is that from that moment, I bought my first Bitcoin at $3. And I said, I'm not going to speculate with this. I'm going to own more Bitcoin every single month. And I'm going to defund my fiat currency and boycott the central banking system. And I'm going to peacefully resist against it. And my rule was that whatever the price is, I wouldn't decide to time the price. I would just own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Slowly over time, I eliminated all my riba, all of my debt. And it took me to a place of financial strength that I never, ever imagined was possible. And so I was able to invest through shared equity using hard money, this Bitcoin, into companies that were going to further the Bitcoin community. I invested in about 100 different companies, and many of them came the largest companies in the world in Bitcoin today, whether it's Coinbase, Kraken, Circle, Bitfinex, Bitstamp, and many, many others. Some of them went down a completely different path. I invested in the largest exchange in India, UnoCoin, the largest exchange in Mexico, Bitso, an exchange that was bringing Bitcoin to different parts of Africa called BitPesa, and invested in an exchange, Bitstamp, that was bringing Bitcoin to Europe, and then Kraken and various other ones that were bringing Bitcoin to America. And the more I supported the ecosystem, the bigger the ecosystem got. And we essentially created, as a community together, what Bitcoin is today, with many, many iterations, many, many things that went wrong, many, many haram activities that were done with Bitcoin. But the beauty was that Bitcoin itself punished anybody that engaged in excessive leverage, that engaged in gambling, that engaged in any activity that would involve leveraging your Bitcoin and putting them on exchange and engaging in excessive speculation. Over time, the people that just bought it every month, regardless of price, and did that for every 4-year cycle, they essentially ended up in a higher dollar wealth than anyone else. Everyone else that engaged in all of these crazy speculative activities, in fact, everything that we're taught in Islam is haram, in fact, decreased people's wealth, was my general observation. Whereas those that followed without even knowing it, many of the principles that we're taught about Islamic halal finance ended up with a life-changing amount of wealth that they could then follow rules in order to make a difference in the world and in society. And through this mechanism, I eventually found Islam myself, because I was trying to understand how you could use this in order to reverse the destruction of the fiat currency system. And I learned about proof of work. I'm not going to cover it because I'm sure other speakers have covered it here today. But essentially, by allowing people to own their own money without a bank, spend their own money peer-to-peer without the government telling them that they have to invest in haram activity, and codifying the properties of halal hard money, people were able to defeat the system, boycott the system, and completely live in what I believe a Islamic principled way, as much as you can in a society where violence and haram activities are codified into the financial system. So after achieving, inshallah, that I was able to achieve the financial success and try and do as much good with that as I possibly could, I created this concept called proof of weapons to try and help people understand the financial system and how haram it is today. And what I'd like to do is try and describe to you this concept of proof of weapons, so that you can understand how important proof of work is, and also the iterations that I believe were speculative attacks to confuse people, like proof of stake, are in fact attacks to try and drive people in the wrong direction. And so I could go, having spent 25 years of my whole life doing nothing but study every single aspect of money, from theological history, economic history, investing, being around in Bitcoin from $3 to where it is today, seeing what people got wrong, what people got right, seeing all the different attacks, the different iterations of Bitcoin. I've learned an incredible amount, having invested in lots of different companies, bad investments, good investments. And I've reached this place today where I think the starting point to understand the true nature of our system today is, I see it as an event in 1697 when the Bank of England created a debt-based Ponzi scheme with the king at the time in order to fund the Napoleonic Wars. And the Napoleonic Wars, in fact, Napoleon was a monetary reformer that was anti-debt. I don't agree with many of the things that Napoleon did in order to expand the colony. But he actually, rather than take money from the Rothschild family, he sold Louisiana State to America because he didn't want to borrow from the family that was creating a debt-based central banking system into France. Eventually, that cost him his life and an assassination. And pretty much everybody that has tried to do the same has also been eliminated by the proof of weapons system as well. And when you look around the map and look at all the war, death, and destruction that happens, you realize it is actually our fiat currency that codifies war, death, destruction, and violence. And I'll forward that to 2008, which was a pivotal moment when the system blew up and Satoshi Nakamoto created the Bitcoin white paper, to October the 7th, where the Palestinians gave us an example of how haram and the catastrophic consequences of the fiat currency system are, when we got to see a genocide documented in real time every day, that has been probably the worst 16 months of my life. But I want to use it in order to try and help people understand that it is, in fact, fiat currency that creates the genocide. And it is actually the violence that is codified into the fiat currency system. And so in 1694, the King of England, to fund a war, codified a debt-based financial system by handing over the ability to create the pound every time the Bank of England would issue a loan. And if it would create £1,000, it could charge an interest to the government of 10%. And then the government would have to engage in activities that would then allow the £100 to be created. And so if you hand over a monopoly to the Bank of England to create £1,000, and it needs to be repaid as £1,100, the obvious question is, where does the £100 to repay the interest come from? The answer is it doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, then you need to find somebody else that will borrow that money into existence. Because the double accounting system that the Bank of England created was that you could take that £1,000 and you could create both an asset and a liability at the same time. And then it would need to be repaid with the riba on top. And the only way to create the riba on top was to get somebody else to borrow the money. And so through this mechanism, a perfect incentive system to get every individual, every corporation, and every government in debt existed. And with that, it needed to expand the model, and to expand with it the exponential riba in a debt-based Ponzi scheme that was essentially constructed by William Patterson lending this money. And in fact, the money to lend never actually existed. It was created through this creative accounting mechanism. And so through this, the British Empire was able to obfuscate the true fraud of the pound system. And having known this and learnt this, currency became a weapon of mass destruction in order to colonize countries, in order to take a ideology called mercantilism, which was essentially the raping, pillaging, and stealing and piracy of resources from countries that didn't have a debt-based financial system in order to steal their hard money, whether that be gold or silver. And so this mechanism got the government and the British government deeper and deeper into debt. It got British corporations deeper and deeper into debt. And it got British individuals deeper and deeper into debt. And in order to roll over the scheme, it became very apparent that all you needed was to fund wars, and you could make these massive loans. And then you could fund the other side of the war, and you could make a massive loan on both sides, and you could construct a way of the winner of the war, whichever side it was, would assume the debt of the other. And the country which had gold reserves would have to actually pay that debt down in gold by destroying their fiat currency. And this was the way of essentially colonizing India, winning wars, and engaging in death, destruction, and violence globally to steal everyone's gold. And so the British Empire became a master counterfeiter, and it innovated, the naval ships and the British East India Company that essentially codified the proof of weapons network that was taken over by the US later, when the British government went bankrupt. And so what we did, for example, is we went into Africa, in Ghana, and they had hard money. They had these currency called agra-beads. It was beads that existed, that you could display your wealth, and it was scarce and rare, and there was a fixed supply of these agra-beads in Ghana. And so we invented glass making, and we went into Ghana and we flooded the market with counterfeit agra-beads that were constructed through glass making. And this crashed the currency, created hyperinflation, and then we used that in order to negotiate and steal all of the gold of various regions across Africa and all of their resources that we needed. And we allowed them to trade, and we created the transatlantic slave trade, to bring African slaves over to our country, to build our country, based upon plagiarizing and counterfeiting currency. We did this in America as well. Independence Day, was in fact not just the Boston Tea Party. It was the Bank of England made 3 attempts at taking over the American economy by installing a central bank. The first central bank, the second central bank, and it was the Rothschild families that later took over the Bank of England, that constructed many of these dual funding of wars in order to plagiarize currencies in order to colonize countries. And eventually, we got the Federal Reserve System in 1913. So what happened prior to that is the British government was bankrupted by the Bank of England. It colonized India, stole all of its gold. The Bank of England ended up with all that gold. It created the transatlantic slave trade. It engaged in creating organizations like HSBC, which was installed through owning and settling for Hong Kong, and creating a drug trade traffic route to take opium, from poppy seeds in India, and get the Chinese people addicted to drugs through opium wars, and then use that in order to make the population very unproductive so that we could steal all of their silver. And we ended up accumulating through mercantilism and the British East India Company vast amounts of gold and silver, and colonized greater and greater parts of the world. But it was the Bank of England that ended up with all that gold, and the government was simply a mechanism for getting deeper and deeper into debt and enforcing the creation of this violence and financial innovation funding weapons in order to successfully colonize more countries. Now, there was a key problem. The Bank of England bankrupted the British government. And so round about the early 19th century, an ideology of financiers called Zionists managed to come up with a plan with the British government to refinance all of that debt and change a world order. And so in 1914, it was determined that Winston Churchill and Woodrow Wilson, would later come into the equation, would take all of this gold and silver and negotiate a deal with Zionists that was an atheist ideology that would weaponize the religion of Judaism through manipulation of interpretations of the Torah, manipulate Christianity through manipulated, interpretations of the gospel, and also weaponize Islam later to create this whole concept of strategic tension, which I'll cover in a bit, to help you understand how this network grew. And so to cut a long story short, World War I was a manufactured war in order to overthrow Ottoman empires, the Prussian Empire, and basically bring America into the war, so that we could install, in fact, the Federal Reserve System. So in 1913, we got it. It was chartered in 1914, And in that year, we got the American people to pay tax in order to cover the debt that essentially you became independent of the British Empire. But we covertly took over the American empire through the three central banks. Presidents were assassinated in order to stop it happening, but eventually we codified it with the creation of the Federal Reserve. It was a secret meeting between implants of the Rothschild family, like the Morgans, the Rockefellers, and the Federal Reserve System was created as the infamous creature from Jekyll Island. What it did is it funded the war by the British Empire taking Zionist funding, collateralized much of the gold, and created the environment that would lead to a covert operation to bring America into the war in 1917. It also led to a declaration called the Balfour Declaration, which Walt Rothschild negotiated with Balfour from the British Crown in order to bring America into the war in exchange for an ethno-supremacy project to use settler colonialism in order to take over Palestine with an imperial project to destabilize the region and create the downfall of the Ottoman Empire. And so the Balfour Declaration led to the creation of Israel and the creation of the weaponization of this word called terrorism. And so the terrorist militia groups like Haganah and various others that later became part of the Israeli government and the IDF were utilized in order to create false flag operations that would trick Jewish people into thinking that they were so fearful that they needed to go over to Israel. In its extreme, there was the funding, the Rothschild family funded the Bolshevik Revolution, which overthrew the Russian Tsar and replaced it with an ideology called communism. And that communism led to the creation of the Soviet Union, which took all of Russia's gold, which was completely pillaged through this operation, and transferred it over to the Federal Reserve. All of Britain's colonized gold and silver was transferred over to the Federal Reserve. And also, the escalation with Germany, we counterfeited their currency and installed a debt-based central bank into Germany that created the Weimar Republic, that led to one of the worst economic environments by plagiarizing and destroying their currency, that killed many, many German people after World War I. And so simultaneously, we created this new world order. The problem is that there was a resistance against it, and it led to a Jewish conspiracy-led ideology led by Adolf Hitler that arrested the Rothschild family, and then basically bought into a Jewish conspiracy that all Jewish people were going to actually do the same that they did to Russia in Germany. And so he came up with this plan, which led to the collective punishment of all Jewish people, and a non-debt-based monetary system that essentially became the foundation of a non-riba system that completely saved the German economy. But Adolf Hitler engaged in collective punishment and haram activities that led to the Holocaust and various other things that changed the world forever. Now, the Zionists actually negotiated a deal with Adolf Hitler in order to take Germany's gold and take Jewish Germans and take 60,000 of them and unnaturally install them into Palestine, that became the foundation of the ethnic cleansing settler colonialist project. We all know what happened later. We ended up in World War II. And in World War II, all of the gold ended up in America under the Federal Reserve System. We had a Great Depression in between, That led to a speculative attack on US stocks that then led to a crash because the Federal Reserve crashed the market. It used interest rates in order to crash the market. And that crash meant that the banks and financial institutions that were all shareholders in the Federal Reserve were able to colonize all of the shares of those that were stuck in the debt-based system or the river-based system. That led to the confiscation of all Americans' gold. In 1933, FDR did an executive order in order to require all Americans to hand over all their gold for $20 of a fake debt-based Federal Reserve note. And after World War II, we created the proof of weapons network, which was that during Bretton Woods, the post-World War II world order, all the countries, firstly, we created this organization called the Bank for International Settlements, which was basically saying that Germany needed to repay all of its gold over to America. And this bankrupted, that led to the Weimar Republic and the resistance against it, and then all the atrocities that happened. But the Bank for International Settlement became a predatory organization for funding wars all around the world in order to get the world addicted to dollars. That was the Bank for International Settlements. So we had the Bank of England, the Bank for International Settlements. After World War II, we created the International Monetary Fund. And the agreement was that everybody should come off the gold standard. And everybody should stop trading their currencies and making them exchangeable for gold, and only make them exchangeable for the dollar. And the promise was that because America had all the gold and didn't get destroyed in any of the wars, and was funding all of the wars and all of the weapons through its vast manufacturing base, it was able to determine who should have the weapons, who shouldn't have the weapons, and create a new version of the British Empire through the American Empire that I call the Proof of Weapons Network. The condition was that everybody needed to trade their currency to dollars, but dollars would be convertible into gold, so it had some sound monetary principles. Over time, America then engaged in a operation called Operation Gladio. You can look up. These are all declassified operations. Operation Gladio was the concept of there is a industry called the military-industrial complex. And all we need to do is create strategic tension around the world. So we had the Federal Reserve, which was a mechanism for taking out middle-class Americans, getting all of the companies into debt, and bankrupting the US government. It only had about $250 million of debt at the time. The US government now has $37 trillion of debt and $250 trillion of unpaid liabilities today. It is exactly where the British Empire was when the Bank of England occupied Britain and bankrupted the government through excessive wars. And so the same strategy was used. The strategy was create strategic tension. We have an argument called capitalism versus communism. They funded both the Hitler regime, Wall Street funded it. It also created the Federal Reserve, and it also funded the Bolshevik Revolution and the Soviet Union and the communist empire that resulted. And you could use this strategic tension in order to fund both sides of all wars. And so we entered into the Cold War. And the Cold War was an arms race that essentially justified the printing of dollars in order to make sure those dollars came back to America to purchase weapons. And there would also be the Soviet Union. And so by having two sides of the ideology, the Soviet Union through communism could, through totalitarian, steal all the wealth of the Russian people. And the Federal Reserve could engineer the financial system and the dollar to keep the debt-based system alive for as long as people would borrow those dollars into existence. In a system where all dollars are debt, so anyone that's got a positive balance in their online banking means that somebody else has a negative balance and there's not enough money to repay all the dollar debt. And so all you got to do is continually export dollars globally and make sure the money gets spent back into America. And they essentially created these covert operations to leave false flag operations called terrorism today, where you would essentially dress up, for example, the Levant affair. Israeli IDF soldiers would dress up as Arabs, and then they would blow up like the King David Hotel, and they would engage in terrorism. And then they would use their control over the media to say, hey, look what the Egyptians are doing. And then America could use that fear to manufacture consent for wars. And all you needed to do is call those people in the region terrorists and those people communists. This essentially is the proof of weapons network. And this is why America is deep into debt. You can look through the entire balance sheet of America right now, all of that 37 trillion, and find out that Israel created the justification for $7.5 trillion worth of war through false flag operations. You can look at even Europe right now. There are strategic operations where the CIA did coups in Ukraine, installed Zelensky, and created the justification for asset stripping all of the rare earth minerals out of Ukraine, kill Ukrainians and Russian people, at the same time as making sure that Europe is printing the money, America's printing the money. Everyday Americans are going deeper into debt. The middle class Americans are losing their real wealth, and that money is printed. It goes into Ukraine, and then it comes back into America, and military companies receive all that money. And the CIA represents the corporate interest, where we have this three-tiered system. Layer one of the proof of weapons network is the central bank, a codified debt-based Ponzi scheme where more riba has to be created in order to pay off the old riba. In order to justify that system, to create more dollars, you have intelligence agencies like the CIA, like Mossad, like MI6, which create false flag operations and represent corporate interest, but pretend it is for national security. That's layer two. Layer three is governments. And through layer one and layer two, you install governments that you can take this money, you can money launder it through organizations like the Vatican Bank, that then create this vast money laundering organization that receives 15% of black market activities. And so today, all of the drugs get into America because through this money laundering network, it actually funded through black ops like sex trafficking, human trafficking, pornography, all of the haram activities that we're not meant to engage in. So our dollar bill, our pound bill, our euro bill is codified riba and haram built into the protocol because it's all funded by these black op operations like human trafficking and sex trafficking. And riba is the layer one. And then they install governments that their job is to essentially, if you look at the politicians around the world, their job is to simply create the narrative justification for representing the corporate interests in order to keep this debt-based Ponzi scheme alive. IMF then got the world addicted to dollars. They use those dollars where you would take the Bank for International Settlements, install a debt-based Ponzi scheme. For example, take Lebanon today. It installed the Lebanese central bank. It would then use the IMF in order to economically destroy the country through hedge funds that could crash a currency and destroy wealth. The central bank that then could shut down the banks and people could no longer access their dollars in Lebanon. In order to resist against that, an alternative financial system emerged, which is where you could take your jewelry and your gold, and you could borrow interest-free, Islamic-compliant, micro loans in order to fund business. And the IDF, when they went into Lebanon, the first place they destroyed was those Islamic banks, which had all of the gold that was the backing of these interest-free micro loans that allowed the activity to continue. And so that's an example. And I could go to Syria, I could go to Libya, I could go to Iraq, I could go all around the map and show you every single war that is currently being fought and show you how the proof of weapons engineered that death and destruction. It has killed 300 million people have died for this proof of weapons network. And it is now turning against the average American person that is fighting these wars, realizing that they're representing corporate interests and it was all a lie, ending back with PTSD because they had to kill children. And then they come back into America and America's got no money for them. America just will allow them to go homeless. And they've even got drug operations where the CIA allows drugs to get through so that they can get addicted to drugs from this PTSD, become homeless, and are now completely dependent upon the government, or they just enter all economic activity. All of that wealth is going back to the hands of a few, the military-industrial complex, the banking lobby, big pharma, which are drug dealers, the banking lobby, which are debt dealers, the military-industrial complex are the weapons dealers, and other interests, which is how do you make society no longer function by pushing addiction to pornography and even creating sites like OnlyFans, where the best way for a woman to make money today is financially to end up basically a digital prostitute. And this whole industry has created absolute degeneracy, record levels of depression, lowest levels of infidelity. People aren't having children anymore in these societies. Record levels of addiction to prescription drugs, antidepressants, record drug addiction, record suicide rates, record wealth inequality, and the entire system is imploding in itself, where the average European is choosing, the pensioner is choosing between eating and heating, while paid implants like Keir Starmer is sending billions of dollars over to Ukraine to funnel back into the money laundering network to buy the weapons from the military-industrial complex so that the rich can get richer and the poor can get poorer. The system is imploding upon itself. It is now having a tariff war in order to reset the world order, because those that have exited the river-based system, different blocks like BRICS, different blocks like sovereign wealth in Middle Eastern regions like the Qataris, the Emiratis, the Saudis, have used their resources in order to build vast sovereign wealth and now have economic power. And because that economic power exists, the entire system is being reset between those that have a river-based central banking system and those that have resources and surpluses. So the system is blowing up on itself, and we're creating a new proxy war where essentially Europe is about to be put onto a central bank digital currency, and America is about to build a stablecoin system where Elon Musk and technocrats and wealthy billionaires that have benefited from the system can take over the dollar, create social credit scores through all of our X activity, XAI, auditing all the government, all of that big data. And essentially, America is currently being asset stripped to build an AI totalitarian technocracy so that they can control the dollar through billionaires that have benefited from this system, who are all creating technology for the military-industrial complex that Snowden revealed was just a backdoor into the NSA, so that that could be weaponized and bribed against us, and manufacture consent like the Patriot Act, where if you can just classify somebody a terrorist and label them for protesting against Israel at a university, you can be arrested, put in Guantanamo Bay, and deported with no due process. We're now beta testing artificial intelligence warfare in Gaza to create war, occupation as a service, genocide as a service. All of that data is being used as command and control technology. Will be beta tested in Europe through a central bank digital currency that can codify money into this creating universal basic income so that they can beta test it for what can be done by the billionaires that own America right now, because they were able to borrow at 0% interest from the Federal Reserve through quantitative easing. This is the proof of weapons network. This is what we were warned about. This is why riba is the most destructive, and it is anytime you use a dollar or euro, you are forced into the system, haram by code, by nature. And so I'm going to just give one more thing, because I've covered a bit more than I thought I would, and maybe we can do some questions. But in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto released a white paper. Within that white paper, the headline that was created into the first block, and I'm sure other speakers have covered how it works, so I won't do that. It created a system called peer-to-peer electronic cash that was based upon a proof-of-work system. And that proof-of-work system was essentially repurposing energy in order to back a network where no one could change the rules. And by having a system where no one could change the rules and a fixed supply, it codified money you can own, money you can spend, and money that has a fixed supply. All of the properties of gold in the digital era, but without the flaws of gold. It was perfectly auditable. It could be transported globally at any scale, and it had a complete fixed supply, so inflation wasn't built into the system. It also basically gave people an exit to boycott the system. So I took my fiat currency and I bought Bitcoin at $3, and I learned how to self-custody my Bitcoin. And I invested it in productive activities. If I wanted to feed a child in Gaza, I could send some Bitcoin because I would get my bank account censored for doing that. If I wanted to support free media, I was able to fund WikiLeaks that was going through a financial blockade because it was revealing the crimes against humanity that were happening in Iraq as 1 million civilians were murdered by the proof of weapon system. And our prime minister actually took the person that created that, Julian Assange, and prosecuted by creating a fake rape claim on him in order to turn him into a political prisoner to make sure that WikiLeaks never told the truth. Because the biggest resistance against this was peer-to-peer media, which WikiLeaks enabled. We now know the truth of all these wars. Those that are fighting the wars have now figured out that this was just for corporate profits and to prop up the proof of weapons network. We now have peer-to-peer systems that could keep these networks alive. We can now direct the flow of our money to halal activities without a bank in the middle. And every dollar, euro, or pound that is saved in Bitcoin in self-custody is a peaceful boycott of the violence behind the proof of weapons network. Because you are taking your fiat currency that creates war, death, and destruction, and you are exchanging it into digital, hard, sound money. And you can dictate the flow, so a middleman is not dictating the flow, so that you can take all of what we are taught in the Quran and spend it outside of the codified halal fiat currency proof of weapons network, codified through riba, to create death, destruction, war, and violence in a debt-based Ponzi scheme that will inevitably hand over the vast majority of wealth to eventually one world government with a full surveillance state, with a universal basic income that can force us by code to spend money on everything we are prohibited from spending on. And that is the system that we have today. And that is why I believe that Bitcoin and understanding the Islamic principles and the resistance that proof of work against the proof of weapons network can bring to us, and avoiding the control mechanisms like proof of stake, where anyone that controls the stake can control the network. Avoiding those mechanisms, I believe that we can usher in decentralized artificial intelligence, decentralized social media, decentralized money, decentralized data, so that we can take back control and decentralize what the central bank set out to centralize. Because once the end result of this Ponzi scheme is one world government, one world currency, with full surveillance, full command and control, in order to steal your money to fund the worst crimes against humanity: sex trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, pornography, and everything that we are prohibited from engaging in. And that's why I'm passionate about this conference, and that's why I would like to take any questions if I've got time. And I hope you enjoyed that presentation.
Amazing, beautiful history lesson and motivational talk there from Brother Simon. I'm going to only have time for one or two questions, so I'm going to start with the brother here.
Jazakallah. Thank you, Simon. You can hear me, I'm guessing?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that insightful information. It was very, very, very insightful. As you know, all wars, there's a saying that all wars are bankers' wars, and you've kind of went deep into that with the Proof of Weapons network, and that's actually how I got into Bitcoin. I watched a documentary called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. Highly recommend it, and I organically got into Bitcoin that way. But I have two questions and a comment. So my first question, maybe I could read it both. If you need me to repeat it, I will. Do you think if there was mass adoption of Bitcoin, all wars would cease? Or in other words, would nations be too broke to fund these wars? Because I believe the alternative would be through like taxation, taxing the citizens. And why are nations, certain nations, or even charging their citizens or taxing their citizens when they could just print? And then I have a follow-up comment. If you would like, I could ask now or after you answer those. So,
yeah, shall I do the first question first? My answer to that is no. I believe that only Islam can end all wars, and so mass adoption of Islam is the only way to do that, by people engaging in these principles. But in Islam, we're taught free trade, hard money, and ethical activities. And so Bitcoin is a tool for allowing us to actually get closer to that constant struggle within ourselves to boycott the haram activities. And so in itself, Bitcoin can't achieve it. But I personally believe that Bitcoin can bring us closer to the way that we were meant to trade, that Allah told us we should be trading. Wallahi, I believe that Bitcoin brings us closer to that goal. But humans are humans, and we need to go through our internal struggle and make sure we use hard money. But let's not rig the game. If you could remove the rigged game, which is designed, to bring out the worst in human behavior, because you pit us all against each other in a debt-based Ponzi scheme, a musical game of chairs, where you have to, in fight for survival, ensure that you get the chair. And to ensure that you get the chair, you probably have created a game where you're going to bring out the worst version of yourself and engage in the activities that are the most destructive and most harmful for society. So in itself, it won't end all wars, but I believe that the combination of Islam and hard money and Bitcoin educating people into the destruction of riba, because when I tried to explain this system to people before Bitcoin was around, and I was in the monetary reform community, people didn't get it when I would explain how money was created. But once they have Bitcoin and they realize they can own their own money, spend their own money, and have fixed supply, and it is backed by a network of 1,000 exahashes, solving a million, quadrillion mass problems per second in the world's largest distributed supercomputer that is apolitical and has hash power in America, in Russia, in China, in Iran, in Africa, in Europe, in South America, in Central America, in Australia, around all countries that don't get on with each other. meaning that no government and no central bank can take it down. In fact, they couldn't beat us so badly that they had to engineer Operation Choke Point 2.0, where the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and the SEC took out the 3 crypto-friendly banks by engineering interest rates and engineering war with the Ukrainian war invasion, pumping up the price of oil, and getting agents of the proof of weapons network to withdraw their money from Silicon Valley Bank, to crash the bank through Peter Thiel, who is a tool of the proof of weapons network, through Palantir, that's providing all the technology, that is committing the genocide through artificial intelligence, that is a beta test for everyone else. He came and asked everyone to withdraw their money from Silicon Valley Bank. That crashed Silicon Valley Bank. That took out the 3 crypto-friendly banks, Silvergate, Signature, and Silicon Valley Bank. And then implants like SBF, which was the only one that met with SEC, Gary Gensler, no one else in our industry could meet them, and IDF soldiers like that were connected to Netanyahu, like Alex Majinsky, that created the Celsius Ponzi scheme. They crashed the system, stole people's wealth, and immediately engineered a regime change whereby the Biden administration would prove the BlackRock ETF, so that BlackRock could then get all of its buddies at the banks to own Bitcoin, and created the most successful ETF launch of all time, so that now all of the banks and financial institutions could hold their Bitcoin with BlackRock rather than self-custody, so that it could then engineer the system that we are experiencing right now, which is a change in the global world order, the death of the post-World War II Bretton Woods system that was about to take us to World War III. And now is going round, Larry Fink, telling everybody that the dollar as world reserve currency is likely to be replaced by Bitcoin, while it redeploys capital over to different regions in the world. That is how dangerous Bitcoin is. That they couldn't beat us, they had to join us. But we're holding it in self-custody. And so while if you don't hold it and get BlackRock to hold it for you, then we are de-weaponizing it, but to the point where they actually couldn't beat us, so they had to join us. And now, America is building a Bitcoin strategic reserve. That could give them the tool to take on the Federal Reserve System. That then could take every country like MicroStrategy that wants to build Bitcoin treasury in order to take a speculative attack on the stock market through de-weaponizing the debt capital markets. It is creating a mechanism where the incentive structure to hold your wealth in Bitcoin is defunding the proof of weapons network. And while it will not do everything, because humans will be humans, and without Islam, they won't engage in the activities that prevents these wars from happening, unless they can find another way of doing it, then I believe that that combination is the 1-2 punch. And that is, I think, a worthy mission. Will we get global adoption of it? Of course we won't. But I believe Allah wanted us to be brought onto this earth in order to drive us further and closer to that mission, and creates an incentive structure that defunds the proof of weapons network, that decapitates the codified war that is built into the system. I'm sorry I answered that for so long. I'm sure I've taken more time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Simon, for that detailed answer. So I'll try to make this as quick as possible. My last question is, as Brother Abdullah mentioned earlier, he said in a lot of African nations deal with hyperinflation, such as Uganda, Botswana, a lot of countries, as well as where I'm from in East Africa, Somalia, and they currently use a electronic system called the EVC system. So I said this earlier, but I'll mention it again. I brought up Bitcoin to the former president of Somalia, who's running for re-election in 2026, and he's very open to it, and he has a high chance of winning. Somalia is unique because we had our debt to GDP decreased from 60% to 6%, through an initiative, high indebted. It's through the IMF, so initiative where they basically debt forgiveness initiative. I know you pitched to Boris Johnson, and I know the story behind that where he kind of booted you out the room way back. I think it was like 2014, and Isles of Man, and I believe Nayib Bukele of El Salvador. So yeah, I was wondering maybe I could connect you with him, and you could pitch it better than I can. But my question is, how can a nation circumvent IMF pressure if they were to adopt a Bitcoin reserve?
Yeah, it was a bit hard for me to hear the question, but I think the end question was, here's my, if I heard the question properly, I believe we are at a very unique time in history where the center of the proof of weapons network is essentially going to be artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and AI weaponized warfare that is requiring robotics and artificial intelligence and a social credit system that is currently being built in both China and America. There are two systems that are happening around the world right now. China, because it produces goods, it is engaging in a model to de-risk itself from the fact that America is consuming all its goods, and we're going through this tariff war. And so China created an initiative that was, we need to hedge against America consumption. And so it is investing in countries. And again, I'm not saying that, all governments are, doing evil activities, but the economic incentive is that China wants to rebuild countries in order for them to be wealthy enough to purchase its products. Whereas America created the IMF system that said, we would like to destroy any competition by funding covert regime changes, war, death, and destruction, so that they can buy our weapons because it's part of the ecosystem. And this led to the entire operations that we know are happening in Congo right now, in Somalia right now, where the IDF would create organizations like ISIS, the CIA would create organizations like Al-Qaeda that would be designed in order to confuse people into thinking Islam is connected to the activities that these people are doing. Then anytime you wanted to blow up a country like Somalia to exploit their rare earth minerals and resources, then you just have to say ISIS are here. And then the Trump administration can say, we're doing some strikes there. But it's actually about just exploitation of resources. It's happening in Congo right now. M23 is a Rwandan proxy. Rwanda is stealing all the Congolese resources. That makes up the components of our iPhones, our semiconductor chips, our laptops. Rwanda then is, fake sanctions happen from America, but they're propping up the system. And then they say that M23, which is essentially Western proof of weapons network, these types of things. So all of these operations are happening. But now we're in a change of world order. And this is where it gets interesting. America is adopting a Bitcoin strategic reserve. It could become more profitable to engage in building Bitcoin strategic reserves than the old model of funding war. BRICS is building a new corridor in order to engage in trade amongst countries. It's got a problem. It's creating a currency which it wants to launch in 3 years, and 60% of the currency, or 40% of the currency, is going to be backed by gold. But they're like, how can we stop one country stealing all the gold? Well, all right, Bitcoin solves that problem of auditability and create a federated network and a lightning channel that could solve that problem for BRICS. They may not realize it now, but over time they will. We've also got the Middle East, now that it has vast wealth, they're investing in Bitcoin mining infrastructure. They're repurposing their natural gas in order to build economic power so that they can decolonize, using Bitcoin as one of those tools, while it becomes strategically important in the center of the world. So for example, the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund invested $2 billion in Binance. That's got 260 million users in order to build What I hope would be eventually figure out that although it's got all the shitcoin casino and the haram activities and the fiat currency money printing on blockchains and all that stuff, eventually everyone figures out that it's Bitcoin that is the one you need to be to. On this could redefine capital markets on top of Bitcoin, on layer 2 networks like Lightning, building various other things on top of that. All of these innovations and these experiments can recollaborate the incentives of the financial system. But wouldn't it be beautiful if the economic power in the region leads to a strategic retreat of America away from the Middle East? And we enter into an era of peace because renegotiation and normalization has to happen, because the strategic tension between Israel and Iran is no longer useful for the profits of the military-industrial complex. And the incentives to build Bitcoin strategic reserves for countries to remain sovereign exists. And Europe could fight against what's happening right now, where they're on a path to absolute destruction through central bank digital currencies. But the country could resist against the European Union by building its own Bitcoin strategic reserves. And companies that are about to go bankrupt could resist against it. And the global south could be connected by this network that the Bitcoin enables. And as we enter into all these regional powers, as the new maps get redefined around the world, the incentive to get your share of hash power, to get your Bitcoin strategic reserves. And none of that needs to happen, because we could have a bottom-up revolution where individuals are able to actually take the nation state out of the middle, the corporation out of the middle, and be answerable to Allah only. Because we've now got this decentralized network to resist against the centralization. We're engaging in decentralization is more financial incentive than the centralization. And how could we do that? Well, what if we ended up with, wallahi, some kind of solution in Palestine? And what if Palestine rebuilt its economy on this type of financial system, this type of economic values, this type of Islamic hard money system? And it was located right next to the center of fiat currency oppression, Israel. And the Israeli system imploded on itself because of the debt-based financial system, where anyone that engaged in that currency would end up a debt slave, when if it just engaged in the Palestinian currency built upon top of Bitcoin and built economic activity on top of Bitcoin, that we could actually demonstrate through the center of the world that this genocide that has been so destructive and so disgusting and so hard to watch, that it was actually an intervention in order to deliver a message that actually led to hard money and an economic set of incentivization that would allow for the fiat currency proof of weapons network to be destroyed next to a country that rebuilt itself on Bitcoin strategic reserves and the ability for people to free themselves from the oppression of the proof of weapons network. I think we as Bitcoiners should do whatever we can within our power to try and make that happen. And if we can't make it happen, then we need to resist and we need to boycott the system, and we need to get as many people to understand that you need to own your own money, you need to spend your own money, and if you save every month and don't engage in speculation, don't engage in gambling, don't engage in any of the activities, if all you do, not financial advice, was just save in Bitcoin and do nothing with it other than do good energy of spending the Bitcoin on the activities that are good, for the world, then we could actually create an attack on the haram system with a halal system right in the center of the world where the prophets delivered our messages. I'm hoping, deluded or not deluded, but I choose to believe that that's what this genocide is for. And we as Muslims should be doing everything within our power to free ourselves from that system, free Palestine from that system, and then create an environment where the economic activity of the world can copy that system and free the world from that system. And I personally, with the help of everybody that wants to engage in that activity, will dedicate the rest of my life to that mission. And I believe that is what we are uniquely brought on this world to do. And we need to spread that good message in any way we can to whoever we can, whether it's the micro community, whether it's corporations, whether it's your country, whether it's whatever you can do. We are all in this mission together in order to unribber and dismantle the proof of weapons network without death and destruction, and try and do it with peace, love, and unity in the Islamic way that we know, by showing by example, people can hopefully adopt because the economic incentives are aligned. I'm sorry I've covered too much time, but I think that's all I got time for.